so they can do x-rays and stuff, and then a complimentary full teeth cleaning. So her teeth are, I mean, they were already fine to begin with, but you know, she's 2.5, so yeah, so they just had stuff to get. So she's great, but she has a little shade
Another
patch
2-3
on her
minutes.
leg because of all that stuff.
So right now
and a
we're
little
muted,
one down
yeah?
here. She's just the
Muted and
sweetest thing ever.
Perfect, okay.
I don't know what I'd do without her. Even if there was a meeting
Ladder, maybe?
last month, I wasn't going to be here because I was in Europe for that trip.
They're the assistant. No, the acting city manager is the other city manager.
Yeah. I mean, you just want to see it. So then,
No idea. She's the one that runs the gadget.
She runs the
Well, I don't know.
She runs the
better
gadget.
than a photo. But
Did
it was
you,
like 5 days
see
before we
anything
came back. So I'm just like, okay, well, she's healthy, she's good, but for 20 days, and I can't.
I'm thinking, don't we get coffee?
Well, they were part of the,
She was happy to be home.
Oh, okay, but they're not.
She
They
didn't
didn't.
Sycamore Lane is so good.
no, I just read it on my phone.
She has a lot of
On
fun.
my little phone.
Yeah. What? There are 6 of us.
You don't have an
Mr.
agenda?
We were having issues with the printer, so I'm gonna have it ran over here once it's been printed. It's a rather large packet.
Look at your chart here.
Maybe the one from the state.
Nobody wants to wait for it? Okay.
That's exciting.
I'm not sure, yeah.
I've been trying to print it for over half an hour, and the printer there was issues.
Okay. You need to go to.
I'm having Rob run it over. Hey, how's the print coming along?
Oh, yeah?
See if they signed you.
It's a nice thought. I don't know if I agree.
Okay, I hate to ask you to do this, but can you run the 3 over right now? And then bring the rest after?
There was the 2 of us and Wesley Crow, and we were just, that was fun. Yeah. Well, and we didn't necessarily like everything that was done with it, though, when they took down so much of the plaster and so on. Yeah, that was the only part that I really had an issue with. Yeah, and then, yeah. Well, I think I thought you could seal it off. Yeah, exactly.
I am, yeah, that's the plan.
It's the weirdest
My
experience of going
PowerPoint,
into a
I'm
building.
assuming it's just
It was,
forward,
they had
backward.
scaffolding to the roof, to the sea, or to the sea. Oh, did you? Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember going in and it's like, oh
I'm
my
not one
God,
of the
you know, so you could,
projects. I'm
I didn't
actually from
try
the
to go up
California
the
Office of Historic
scaffolding
Preservation.
because I would have loved to have seen
Some
the,
question about I may be going first. I don't know. I'm fine with whatever they decide. I'm just sitting here because I was under the impression I was up first.
May I?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
I just want to see if this is you. Let's see. Let me just do this real quick.
I've got 2 PowerPoints. There's the Mills Act, and then there is.
I think the Mills Act's in here. This is not you, right?
No, that is not me.
That is definitely not you.
So there's the
think
Mills
that they
Act, and then
really
there's
wanted
something
to,
called Planning
have
for
a parking lot
Success.
that
Yeah,
was
that's
almost-
me.
So you're in there.
Is there another one? Oh, let's see.
There's the structure merit, so there's the Mills Act, and then
That's all me. Yep, those are all me.
see? Okay, this is you.
That.
This is you.
oh, that's interesting.
All right, so that's you there, and if you want to use these keys to forward and back, and then of course, that's
So no one has a
Do
copy
that.
of the agenda?
I have it on my phone. Just look at it on my phone.
I have it on my phone.
I'm sorry.
I didn't print it up, but, oh, okay, Tommy Hill. Oh, wow.
I have printed one every single time I've come here, except for this time.
one here. Look at the, another motto, Stockton, someplace special. Oh, yeah. Slogan of the day.
I remember that. Well, I also used to see a lot of the All-American City. I got there like 2 times or something. Hoping the other 3 will show up.
We don't have any agendas.
Oh,
Nobody has an agenda.
well, people have agendas.
Yeah, well, we don't.
It's just on.
Talking, I think the things are on. I'm in trouble now. Is it recorded for posterity? Oh, jeez.
Perfect.
Is there a willingness to share for the first few items? We can. Did you get a few?
We get hundreds. We have 580. It's fun. There we go. Big box of airheads.
Chair, if I may, it's at your discretion if you want to get started. Just, I know they're on their way. If we could share for the first few items, given that it's the Pledge of Allegiance and the roll call.
Oh.
And we're also, our office is working on getting 3 additional packets to you, so it should be happening pretty shortly.
Okay, I guess we could start then. And Melanie is our Pledge of Allegiance officer.
Well, I
Yes.
think if we could start with the roll call.
Oh, roll call, I'm sorry, okay. I don't have an agenda, I don't know these things.
Understood.
All right.
Member Merlo,
Present.
Member Corradi,
Present.
Member Groom,
Present.
Member Vieux,
Present.
Member Vigil is absent, Member Jaurigue King is absent, Member Nichols is absent, Vice Chair Holzer,
Present?
Chair Swanson.
Yeah, I'm here. Dale Nichols is, he contacted me, he's very ill today, so he's excused. Thank you, okay. And Melanie?
Okay. Pledge allegiance
The first item is adoption of consent calendar and approval of the minutes.
And if you want to look at it, I'm just.
Anybody have, do we have enough to do this?
I don't have them in front of me, but I read the minutes, and
Right.
I would move
so
to approve them.
There's six. There's six of
Corrections or alterations or anything?
No.
So I guess we can ask, do we need a motion to approve minutes? And do we have a motion to approve minutes?
I move to approve.
I'll second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. The minutes are approved. And do we have public comments today?
No cards.
Oh, no cards, okay. Moving on then to the public hearing aspect for structure of merit.
Yes, as we discussed earlier, Chair, if you wish to move anything around on the agenda, you're welcome to do so at your leisure, sir.
No, we're fine.
Sorry, Chair, if you wouldn't mind opening the public hearing formally? Thank you.
We're tapping the gavel, you mean? Okay. Public hearing is now open.
Thank you. Do you have a presentation or anything?
Did you close it and then I speak?
No, it's open. Do you have a presentation?
Okay. So before you is a consideration of a structure of merit designation for the Weber Grammar School building located at 701 North Madison Street. The location is bordered by Park, Madison, Flora, and Monroe. The staff report has been presented to you with the attached nomination. There are three options that the board has before you. A resolution approving the structure of merit, a resolution declining the structure of merit, or a motion referring the structure of merit application to the Landmarks and Historic Sites Committee for review.
Just curious, for anybody here who might know, do we have a representative from Stockton Unified here?
They were contacted, and I made them aware of the public hearing, and they said that they would let us know if they had any questions, and they seemed okay with it.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, I spoke with the Director of Facilities and Planning and notified him of the hearing. He said he would notify the Superintendent's office.
So do we have any discussion? Since we have buttons now to push if we want to speak?
Sorry.
Why, yes. Member Merlo, you may speak.
I so move to make a resolution approving the structure of merit designation for the Weber Grammar School.
And do we have a second?
I'll second.
Chair,
Yes.
just as a formality, before the vote is taken, if you wouldn't mind formally closing the public
Oh,
hearing.
all right.
Thank you.
I'm publicly closing the there we go. All right. I apologize for my inability to whack the gavel.
Thank you so much. Don't worry about it.
Moved in second.
Okay, we have a second from, there was a second from Melanie.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so, and now, this is different because you've given us three recommendations where we would like to resolve granting this. How are we going to compose it then, the resolution?
So if I understood that the motion was to approve the resolution approving the structure of merit, which was presented as the exhibit. So that would resolve the other options because no other action was taken as to the declination or to the possibility for referral. So the matter is satisfied by adopting the resolution.
we're not going to write a resolution, that's what I'm saying.
The resolution was attached as Exhibit 1, or was attached to the staff report, and it included the reference to the application as satisfying the qualifications for the structure of merit. I apologize, I was passing out agendas during that period of time, but it was my understanding that the motion was for the approval of this resolution authorizing the structure of merit. If that is accurate, then this resolution will become the final.
Okay, no, I wasn't aware of that.
The proposed resolution was included in the packet.
I don't seem to have a page 40. Oh, here we go. I would like to point out, as far as the resolution is concerned, I object to lines 2 and 3 as being part of the resolution. As again, because the CEQA section is not included, and second, because this is the definition of historical resource. By listing this as a structure of merit, we're determining it to be a historical resource that probably applies to CEQA from those sections. So I would like those struck. Can everybody take a look at page 41?
If I may, Chair?
Yes.
What 2 and 3 is stating is that it's not constitute a project under CEQA. Therefore, a structure of merit designation is exempt from CEQA. Therefore, this action doesn't constitute that a determination of historical resource is present. That's all 2 and 3 are stating.
Yeah, I find it ambiguous, and I think that line 3 could imply it is an historic structure from my reading of those sections. And as it is the board's resolution, I'm uncomfortable with those lines. And I think that all we need to resolve is that it meets the criteria of structure of merit in the city code, and that's all. And I would ask for a motion to agree with that. Unless nobody agrees with me.
So, Chair, if I may, David Kwan, Community Development Director. So a couple options before you. You can amend the language as you kind of deliberate here. We can take it back and do some more work on it. If there's some legal advice you need from us at this point, maybe Taryn can jump in as well. But to the extent that there are 3 different approaches we can take, if you want to take a stab at revising the language right now, we can do that as well.
Well, has everybody taken a look at it?
So I guess, excuse me.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Member Merlo.
So I don't really have a problem or a question with Section 2, because to
Section
me-
2 is less problematic, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, because it's basically just saying that this is not a project within the framework of CEQA. But for Section 3, I guess I just have a question, or would like some clarification. So if this is not a project in CEQA, then why would we even need to consider if it constitutes a determination as a historical resource? Like, if it's already been described as an action that's not subject to the requirements of CEQA, then why do we need to go further and state that since seeing as it's already not part of CEQA, or it's determined to be not a project of CEQA, why do we need to say that it doesn't even constitute a determination that a historical resource is present if we've already stated that it's not a CEQA project? It just seems redundant to me. I don't necessarily disagree with it because CEQA, we've already established that CEQA doesn't apply because it's a city of Stockton code thing, right? Yeah, I guess I'm just curious.
The concern that I have is that this becomes, the reason I dislike resolutions to some extent is because they become a permanent record. And this could be construed in the future that we're saying it's somehow a significant building but isn't actually historic. And therefore its ability to be demolished is increased. And so and also because in the city ordinances, and we still have the theoretical ability to name things as structures of merit. We have no other authority. And we don't have any particular, we ourselves as this board do not determine these factors. So I'm uncomfortable passing a resolution of things that this board isn't really empowered to do that might in the future threaten whatever benefit the designation could have. So that's why I'm thinking that the second one I find less questionable, but I'm inclined to remove both. But obviously it's the board's pleasure.
So Chair, after the board has this conversation, I can weigh in a little bit more, so I'll wait till the board continues its discussion. But I do have some input I would like to share.
Okay, what's that?
So the action itself is exempt. What we've done in terms of looking at this project from a CEQA standpoint is we look at it to see what the action itself, which is the declaration that is a structure of merit, is exempt. That's the real issue. We're not saying, and we're giving specificity to the action in terms of why that is not a historical resource. We're not saying that by this action it will be such that we're giving it a declaration that in the future, if a demolition should occur, it's not significant. If we actually have, in terms of the process, if there's something that modifies the building later on, and it is a structure of merit, which if this commission designates as such, then we will have to do the CEQA determination at that point to determine what kind of impact this actually has. So this action proposed before the board here is really the action of declaring it as structure of merit, and that's the nuance behind it. And we're just trying to give it more specificity.
Well,
Sorry, I just love this request thing. So
Yes.
just clarifying then, in the future, if somebody wants to, say a developer wanted to demolish the site, or the city of Stockton Unified wanted to do modifications, they would have to go through the CEQA compliance process at that point.
And at that point, because presumably it is designated a structure of merit at that time,
Yes.
then we will have to go through the appropriate CEQA determination for that particular action that's being presented before whatever hearing body it is.
So then this is essentially another layer of protection for the building.
Yes, once you have the structure of merit designation. And that's staff's opinion.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I'm going to repeat, I'm uncomfortable with both, and I will make a compromise and ask for a motion that we remove the line 3. Does anybody care to make a motion?
I will make a motion to remove line 3.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That's been opposed? So we leave the resolution intact?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the pleasure of the board. Moving on. I included this document and this document, and then the original application that had been turned into the board. Is all that in the packets?
Yes.
Okay. What I'm interested in doing here is I provided this is actually the report that was published back in 1980. It was the result of a survey done by the City of Stockton, the Cultural Heritage Board, which at that time had 15 members. The training for the survey was done through a State of California professional hired as a consultant. They did a survey which covered about 80% of the original downtown Charlie Weber acquired land grant, and they surveyed about 80% of the properties. That's the purpose of this document. Now, when the application was turned in for the demolition request for the house on Grant Street, all we got back from that in the application was the actual description of the property. There is a reference to its status as determined by that original evaluation, but that's provided on the document that I included here. So I know that when the applicant did the application, they purchased the entire record. That's public information, but they didn't provide this with the application. And my concern is that back in 1969, the City of Stockton passed the original landmark ordinance. That was followed by 1979 by a preservation ordinance, and the plan in those days was to set up a series of historic districts. This is before there were structures of merit. The structure of merit designation is the local historical listing. That didn't exist at the time of this survey. What the intention of the survey was to do was to survey the entirety of the original city and to rate all the properties, and they mostly finished that. The last survey was done in 2000, and it was an augmentation. In the application for the demolition of the structure, it made a reference to the 2000 survey, noting that the house had been omitted, but actually it had been originally reviewed in one of the first surveys, so it was in fact included. And this original city-sponsored project determined that that particular property received a status of 52S. And 52S is an individual property that is eligible for local listing or designation. And that is a standalone, relatively high rating for local history. It isn't a contributory type of structure in that it's a district. It is singularly the building has historic merit. Now, at the time of this publication, there was no local listing in Stockton. Had there been one, it would have qualified. The purpose of this survey, as given out in the report, was so that in the future, there will be preservation orientation, providing information to potential developers for the preservation and restoration of significant buildings, adapted use and recycling of older buildings, etc. The point about this, and the even reason I get concerned about the Sequit comment on the other property, is that this building was found by a City of Stockton survey under Planning Director Edward Griffith, that this particular building was eligible for listing. At the same time, when it came back for review for demolition, this recommendation was ignored, and the property was determined to be unqualified for any kind of listing, and also local listing, in particular structure of merit. But in reiteration, individual property eligible for local listing is structure of merit. And my problem with that is that even if this building, even if this board could not prevent a demolition, which is not possible, I believe that this board should see such properties and review them for demolition to at least make recommendations, as is featured in the demolition ordinance. Is that following the director's initial evaluation of the property, we should at least be able to review the evidence and make a recommendation. And the point here is that the reason that particular property was considered eligible for local listing was it had primacy as connection to the founder of the city and the original division of property. Now, by grand standards of history, it's a modest little house. But by local history, it's one of the first developments, one of the first properties, and again, it has primal connection to a historical person founding the city. So that's what makes local history. And obviously, I believe the building should not be demolished. But again, at the very least, we should at least be able to provide input. And so what I'm asking for is a resolution that we recommend that we, first of all, see such properties, particularly when they're listed in a city document as being historically significant, and that also perhaps ambiguity in the demolition ordinance should be changed so that is clearer, that when a building comes by that's 140 years old, again, connected to the founding of the city, the board should at least be able to review. So, do we have any comments or questions on this? So anyway, that's what I'm asking for in that case is a resolution repeating what I just said, that we be involved in we be involved in making recommendations of potential historic properties, correcting perhaps ambiguity in the demolition ordinance, and in particular be able to make a review of buildings which have been documented and listed as individually listing. So does somebody care to make a motion to that?
Chair, would you like staff's reading of the code for you and the explanation of the process?
I'm actually yes, I suppose, but I'm familiar with the answer.
Okay, so.
But I'm fundamentally disagreeing because
okay, understand.
The fact is that how in the world can a property listed by the city as eligible for individual listing then not be eligible for individual listing? And all we're talking about here, we could argue with the word, but individual listed structure in this city is a structure of merit. In other cities, it's a historic resource. Any name can be applied. But for local historical purposes, this building was determined 40 years ago by the planning director to be of that status, and yet now it somehow has lost that status and doesn't receive historical review before this board.
I can understand how that appears to not make sense. Just to kind of go over the demolition process, when a demolition request comes through, we determine, is the building over 50 years old? If it is, we determine whether there's a safety issue. Is it unsafe? Is it a public nuisance? If it's not, then a historic evaluation is taken. For this particular case, a full analysis by Page and Turnbull was done where they looked at local records, state and federal designations, and they acknowledged the past local potential for local designation. That was never formalized. It just said that it was eligible for local designation.
It wasn't potential. It was eligible. It was put into the category. If you look at the ratings used in this review, there are potentials. This one was not considered potential. It was rated individually listable. That means it met the standard. And a local standard is quite different from federal landmark, state resource, et cetera. So the evidence hasn't changed. And of course, the report that this decision was based on was supplied by the person, the entity that wants to do the demolition. And other than the historians of the professionals hired to determine it to be destroyed, it wasn't reviewed by other historians of a neutral nature. That is the purpose of this board, and it was this board's predecessor with 15 trained members from a state professional doing the training that rated the building as individually listable at a time when there was no individual listing system in the city. So it doesn't have the word structure of merit, but it was rated at that level. And nothing has changed from that. The evidence that is still there still exists, and the building should have been at least turned over to the board for a recommendation.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, you got it.
With the chair's indulgence.
Yeah, sure.
Scott Carney, Deputy City Manager. Mr. Chair, if the board would like to hear from staff about the current process and how the code works and what process was applied to this particular property, we're happy to do that. If the chair would like to express his own opinion about this property and relitigate that issue here, I don't know that we need staff's time. So I would ask if the board would like to hear from staff about how the current process works, so we can then have an educated discussion about your proposed motion and the problem you're trying to fix.
I'm not trying to relitigate.
Okay,
I'm
so
trying to
then I would ask, sir, if you would like to hear from staff, I'd like to let them make the presentation. If you would like to interrupt staff, then I can excuse them. I'm happy to sit here and monitor the meeting while you do what you're doing. So if you'd like the expertise of staff, they are here, they've made themselves available, and they're prepared to talk about this issue. But I would ask that you not interrupt staff, because that's not appropriate.
Can I'd like to hear from Member Merlo.
Okay, I guess the only point of concern that I have, and this goes back to, I'm not questioning any processes that happen. I think they've, probably taking place the way that they've been taking place. I guess my question, though, is that so Stockton is not a city that has a whole lot of historical research associated with it. And as someone who has spent most of my free time in the past 4 years studying the city's history, I would say that the vast majority of historic properties in this city there isn't substantive research that's been conducted and published so that information is in the cultural body politic of this city. And so you have a lot of buildings and a lot of sites, for example, the Mariposa Hotel that we voted on 4 months ago, that are incredibly historically significant, that are just not in the public awareness. And so my question is that when, if we rely on these, former studies, the ones from 1979, the ones from 1999, it doesn't really matter. I don't actually trust them as a historian, as someone with degrees in history. I don't trust them. I actually don't really trust the Page and Turnbull study. They're citing the Arcadia publishing books, which are not really scholarly, which don't actually do a very good job of surveying the city. And so, with all respect, I don't know if there's anybody from Page and Turnbull, but I don't see that as a trustworthy academic source, someone with degrees in history. And so, and I think that's what it really boils down to, is that when we have this process through which we're assessing properties, like they clearly, they found the Sanborn maps, they looked through the occupant history, they did that homework. But, so like for example, it's across the street from the Ebenezer African Methodist Episcopalian Church. Like, I'd like to know if there was any historical connection with that. I do know that neighborhood, based off of the housing covenants from that time period, was segregated. So I'd like to know who is living there. Were the Rapettis potentially renting it to somebody as well? I mean, there are other records that I'd like to look at besides what you see here. And so that's what I'm a little more concerned about. I don't really have a problem with the process so much as I see that there's a lack of historical scholarship in the city. And as a result of that, I don't think that that, I mean, I'm not blaming Page and Turnbull. They did their best, but when you have to look at Arcadia Publishing Books to give context about the Italian American community or the African American community in the city, that's not good, right? And so I think having another layer to the process, or having, sending this, when these applications come in, sending them, or sending the demolition ordinances or something to either the Hagen Museum or UOP Holt-Atherton, or to the San Joaquin County Historical Museum. I wouldn't recommend that, seeing as I work there, but maybe UOP might be really helpful in identifying certain things that are not clearly apparent in the historical resource surveys. Thank you.
So are you content with this process as it is? My question, my issue basically being is that I think that this is being done ineffectively, and that we should be doing something about preventing the destruction of historical properties. And as long as I've been on the board, we've never reviewed one. And the demolition ordinance that we have now has been in effect for more than 10 years, and this board's never been asked for a review or an opinion. And at least that would be a step in the right direction, and I think that was the intent when it was written. And I think we should resolve for a review of the ordinance and or the process. But again, that's what I think. And that's why I brought this to the board, to see if the board wishes to make that recommendation in a resolution.
What would a review of the process look like?
So, Chair, if I may, there are 3 entities that can initiate a code amendment, basically amending the development code, or most known as zoning code. The Plan Commission, City Council, or the City Manager's Office, which basically drew the delegation to meet. So if you make a resolution to make a recommendation, it has to go to one of those 3 parties. And I will bring forward, if I decide it's a worthwhile endeavor to pursue additional analysis, I would need to know what that change in code means. Changing code is important, and at the same time, for the purposes of this board, we want to streamline things, but at the same time preserve what we can preserve. So the question I have basically is, if there's something wrong with the ordinance, was this the project that caused something wrong with it? Or is there actually something wrong with the ordinance? My understanding, my feeling is that the process worked. You have a 1980 9-page survey, which is attached to this agenda, and then you have a 32-page, much more, then you have the ARG survey that was done in 2000, and then you have the 32-page study by Page and Turnbull, which follows all the local, state, and national standards for doing a historic resources survey. They don't deviate from that. So if the opinion is different in terms of how the outcome of the project should be, that's something different. That's where I make a decision on, okay, I don't necessarily agree with it. But if the process worked correctly, which I believe it did, then what happened is the Page and Turnbull study was done. My staff looked at it, Stephanie looked at it, I looked at it, just to make sure that we all were on the same page in terms of looking at it. Did they follow the process? We believe the process was followed. The code legally says if it's not within that historical context of local, state, or national, then I'm going to issue the demolition permit, and I've authorized that. If I believe that is worthy of nomination, which the study did not say, then I will then refer that to the Cultural Heritage Board, and that's what the code says. So I don't think, in my opinion, that the process was faulty. I think there's a difference of opinion as to whether the subject matter should be listable or eligible for listing or not, and that's a different issue than whether the process worked or not.
Well, if the Heritage Board, my reading of the code, when the code was produced back in the late 2000s, was it was intended to stop demolitions of historic properties which have been endemic in the city, and that demolitions of potential historic properties were supposed to be brought to the Cultural Heritage Board. And perhaps there's a way that sometimes that wouldn't happen, but it's never happened. And the argument has to be that there hasn't been a historic building torn down in the city of Stockton since 2006, which is probably not true. And so if there has been no such destruction, the ordinance is working. If there have been any, the ordinance is not working, because this board has never reviewed any such possibility. So I think the ordinance is either, well, whatever. I believe the ordinance is not exactly followed. I think the preliminary determination should come to the board for an opinion. I think the ordinance, we should recommend that it be, if it needs to be altered, that somehow gets in here, or that some kind of neutral historical body reviews some potential demolitions of properties, because there have been none that have been saved since this ordinance was passed. So we can have a difference of opinion on that, but the proof of the success of the ordinance in terms of preservation, which was the intent of it, because it came as the result of the demolition of historic properties through a lawsuit, that sometimes we should have a building referred to this body, and this body should produce an opinion. Now, that's, again, never happened. I find that, therefore, proving the process isn't working. Whether or not the process would be that the opinion or determination or the evaluation would go to UOP or the state of California, I have no objection. But it should go to some kind of historical board that is not directly benefiting from the demolition of the building. The report that was submitted comes from the applicant for the demolition. And believe it, I find it very unusual to expect that an applicant would turn in a historical review that doesn't support the position of the applicant. That's normal. It's somebody else, some neutral body, historical-based body, perhaps doing new original review of the properties to determine otherwise. As far as the quality of the 40-year-old review, the only review we have of that property previous to this point is that the property had value. My issue isn't so much that particular property. My issue is the process, because there's going to be another building come by soon enough that will also not be reviewed by this board, that arguably will have historical property, is my concern. And I think this board should actually function. When you look back in time, 40, 50 years ago, this board was out reviewing with training which properties had historical value. These records produced by the city, I'm not sure the city has them anymore. The state does. This is where I got them. And I think that you look at the intent of what went on 40 years ago, if I do not believe that, as a historian, that 40 years ago they made such an egregious error that we couldn't at least review their judgment. And that's one thing about determining historical values of things. If we have to review everything every time, we'll save nothing. So my point being is that when we put something on a structure of merit list, for example, I hope that in the future that determination will have some value as well. And the same thing from this. This report from this city, from a previous planning director, determined that the property had historic value. That has now just been rejected at a higher level in terms of it doesn't meet a higher criteria. The ordinance that we have in our city, for example, does not specifically list our own determination. It's actually state and federal listing. I mean, higher standards. Local history is a different standard than a federal standard or a state historic standard for a landmark. And I think it could be improved, and I think we could save some structures. When you read this report, the body of the final report from that original survey, it talks about the city trying to come around to turning around past practices where buildings are being destroyed without review. Well, that still hasn't happened, because as long as I've been on this board or involved with historic review and demolitions, like again, we haven't done any. We haven't reviewed something in that recommendation was heeded and something was saved. So, you know, we can all list a whole bunch of buildings that have been torn down in the last 15 years that had significance. through different prospects of neglect, vandalism, lack of intervention, and so forth, but something needs to change or we're not going to be saving anything. So I think we should have a resolution to make a recommendation for a code review and try to get some action to make this, help this city preserve some of its assets. So. If the board does not wish to, that's acceptable. as well, I
Reviewing
guess.
the Turnbull study real quick. Looking for something.
It's me.
It's you, Bob. Member Holzer.
Of course, I go back on this board a really long time, and it seems to me that when it was to the community development director to make a decision, that we got some notification of it before the decision was made, and if we had any input, it was welcome. And that obviously wasn't the situation, you know, in this situation for this property. I guess there's nothing in the code that says, from what you said, that there, you know, is any requirement for the community development director to consult with the Cultural Heritage Board, but it seems, I mean, one of the biggest purposes of this board is to try to save the historic buildings. And I mean, I think that we should be at least asked about the buildings. Most of them that I've seen over the years, it wasn't a big deal. You know, it was a commercial building, no particular consequence. But my goodness, this was one of the oldest buildings in the city. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know how we can change code on it, but it just really, you know, makes the purpose of the board questionable.
Oh, go ahead. You want to push the button?
Oh, as long as you know I'm asking.
Yeah, okay, Melanie.
Is there any way, I know Stephanie, you were walking through the process. Is there any way you can pick up where you left off, just to reiterate what the planning director had stated, the process of where we might fit into the process?
Sure. So after the historical evaluation is taken, such as the report that we've been discussing, at that point, if the evidence and information comes in showing that it's eligible, it merits a, you know, historic designation of some sort, the director can then refer it to the Cultural Heritage Board for consideration and review. And that's the intent behind it. So, you know, do all the homework ahead of time, make sure that you've got the right information there to determine whether or not it is historic, and then refer it to the board.
Which means that the director determines if the building is historic. And if the director determines the building is historic, it's then sent to the Cultural Heritage Board.
Yes, and that determination.
Which is exactly the opposite of what the board was doing 40 years ago when these surveys were done, is that the board was the one that was trained to make the determinations of historic nature, and that was presented to the director, not the opposite. So there is no purpose for this board then, because if we're being said we can agree with the determination as opposed to make a recommendation, we can recommend against it. That would be interesting, but that would be the Historic Demolition Board or something. The purpose of a Cultural Heritage Board, we don't have the documents in front of us, but we are supposed to make recommendations for code, which we've attempted to many times in the past. We are also supposed to be surveying districts and properties. That's all in code too. We never do that, and we've never had the cooperation to be able to do it. And in terms of the last line of defense is the actual demolition of structures. And we go back and look at the 2000 survey. There were many, many buildings in that survey which said, for example, contributory to a potential downtown historic district. That was part of the old plan to have a bunch of historic districts. Well, at this point in time, you can go back and look at that recent survey. That's only 20 years ago. And most of the buildings I'm referring to now have all been demolished. And as they were demolished one by one, the reasoning was always, well, it's only a contributory to a potential district. we don't have a district, you can demolish it. Well, now there's no possibility of having a district at all because those buildings are all gone. I'm thinking of Market Street. So when I come back to this stuff, it's like 40 years ago at the expense of, $50,000 was kind of real money, 1979. And again, the city went through an awful lot of trouble to survey 80% of the structures in the original downtown Charlie Weber grant. But those reports are not being used, which is kind of the point. The problem I have is then when is doing a survey going to be respected and valued if you look back at it in the future and you determine it not to be valid? Because that's all I'm hearing tonight, is this building was determined, but it may not be relevant. Okay, but it looks to me that the people that were doing this survey might have been properly trained and found some fairly significant structures. And looking at that building, it has, I would say, at the very least potential, if not certain. And possibility meant it probably should have come to us for recommendation, according to my reading. And the trouble is that we're certainly going to find buildings that are going to be iffy. I don't see this one as being iffy. I think that we should follow what the report that the city produced 40 years ago said about the structure. Can ignore our recommendation and determine it to be demolished anyway, but at least we'd be involved in the process and we might save something. So that's my concern. Does anybody else have a comment? Okay. Member Corradi.
Yeah, I try to stay pretty balanced on these issues, but I also agree it does not make or seem consistent with the intention if these issues will only come before us after they've been determined to possibly be historic. So I can see that. I don't know. It does seem backwards to me. I'm not sure how to fix it, but there are people on this board, and I know that part of the requirements of the individuals on this board is that there's a historian, an architect, and all these various people that are educated to determine these things. So it seems a little backwards if they're not able to actually use their education and experience to do that. But I'm not sure how to resolve this.
Well, my suggestion is we resolve to make a resolution and we have a committee recommend work on it, because what you do is you, for example, examine the demolition ordinance and work through how it works, so there could be a inclusion in some cases for the Cultural Heritage Board to make a recommendation, as opposed to in all cases, once the determination has been made, then it will come to us. Doesn't seem like we have any function. And how do you determine an iffy thing? Well, for example, if 80% of the city was surveyed 40 years ago, the original city, then you start with this document. And if we find that the listing says is eligible, we at least then be called in. So perhaps an ordinance saying if the structure was determined to be potentially historic in a previous survey, it should come to the Heritage Board. That's an example. Or there could be a different year limit. For example, if the building is over 75 years old, it should go to the Cultural Heritage Board. The number of structures is not an overwhelming number. Since we really don't have much to do most of the time, and we've never done any of these as long as I've been on the board, might want to start doing a few. So there's a number of pragmatic things we could do or propose to include some potential structures for review. And those are my suggestions. I just think that we should resolve, have a resolution to make a recommendation, and we can work on the recommendation in the coming months. Are there any other comments on? Oh, lights flashing. Sorry, I didn't see you push your button. Phillip.
Oh, sorry, just reading something.
You did push your button, right?
Yeah, I did.
Right.
Yeah. So, first of all, I want to clarify. When I said that I didn't trust the report earlier, it's not that I don't trust Page and Turnbull. We need to make sure that's very clear in the minutes, because I don't want to. They did a very professional job. And this ties directly to what Wes is talking about, is that I'll reiterate, there's not a lot of published research on the city of Stockton. And so something tells me this building might not all be all that historic. Maybe this building is something that's okay being demolished. But in a lot of cases, and this goes back to this issue, is in a lot of cases when a building does get demolished, because there's just a lack of resource, of information and informational resources available, I feel like a lot of buildings in the city that shouldn't have been demolished and wouldn't have been demolished if there was research available did get demolished. And this is like one of those 50-50 things, you know, it's, you know, I'll stay balanced on whether or not the building actually is historic. But like one thing that just comes to mind when I look at this, based off of where the Repettis worked and where the building is, and there's that back shed, what if there's a still in there that we don't know about? And it, you know, and there was there's an alcohol still. You know, was there an archaeological survey of the site done? Right? You know, there's nothing listed here, and there hasn't been a survey of that site. Whereas maybe in San Francisco there would have been. And that's what I'm worried about. Which is why when it comes down to reviewing the process, I think there probably is validity for reviewing the process. That's my last shtick.
Well, again, you know, my concern is not specifically the building in question. To me, the question, I mean, I'll agree with that. The question of the building is, to me, it's at the most skeptical, it's a strong maybe. The building may be interesting and may be important from what I know about it. But I only know about it what I've read in the reports. And I think we certainly could make a more conscientious effort, or the city could, at preserving such structures. If this building were in San Francisco, 10 to 1, it would be preserved simply because of the age. You know, this house being put up in 1885, there aren't that many buildings in the city that are that old. I mean, it's a very limited. The number of buildings that I can think of from the 1860s is count on a hand practically. So you're getting into these older structures, some caution could be applied. And it isn't the particular project or the particular building, it is the process. So, are there any other comments? So I would then ask again, I would like a motion or a resolution to make a recommendation, if that's at all clear. Would anybody care to make such a motion?
Chair, if I may, just to clarify the motion that's being requested, I believe the staff report indicates that it would be a referral to the Planning Commission, given that the Title 16 amendments to Title 16, as David previously indicated, are initiated with the Planning Commission. So if I understand correctly, the motion is to make a recommendation to the Planning Commission that they consider the ordinance as.
Yeah, okay, I'm getting confused. I'm saying to compose a recommendation.
Oh,
So to make words that would actually, I would like some people on the board to work on wording.
Okay, so.
And so perhaps I'm phrasing that incorrectly, but that's what I'm saying. I don't know what to do with it now. I'm saying we have a publications committee, we could have people think about ways, look at other codes, find ways to correct. There's lots of codes out there we could look at as examples and recommend a change to the demolition ordinance. That's what I'm trying to say.
So perhaps if you don't mind, you're requesting a motion for a referral to one of your subcommittees for further discussion of this ordinance that could later be recommended to the Planning Commission.
Yes, that will do.
Mr. Chair. Scott Carney, Deputy City Manager. I would also extend to the board the same invitation that Ms. Acosta and I extended to you, that if the board is interested in reviewing the code and the existing process, probably not something we have the capacity to do en masse all at one meeting, but with the board's guidance, we could schedule discussions at each of your meetings to talk about particular sections. So whether you do a subcommittee or you have a full board discussion, that is something that staff are prepared to provide support on with the attorney's office to provide a description of particular issues in the code, or if you wanted to go A to Z over some period of time, that's something where we could plan out a schedule for that and have a thoughtful discussion that's looking at what Stockton has, what the state requirements are, and then get the board's input about recommendations that you would like. You will be seeing a little bit more of me, given Mr. Kwong's imminent departure. But in that vein, right, I'm sad about that too. You know, as Director Kwong indicated, the director is one of the entities that can initiate code amendments. And so what I would extend to you is that the future Community Development Department Director would be happy to, you know, have staff work with you to bring recommendations forward to the Planning Commission, because as a number of folks have submitted, there's a lot of expertise on this board, and I think to the extent there's procedural problems, or if there are documents from 40 years ago that were not brought to light that should have been looked at, or if the sources that this current study looked at are not adequate, then clearly we are hearing the message that that should be looked at. So we'd be happy to go through the code and work with you to have that discussion and then bring recommendations to the Planning Commission about how to strengthen historic preservation. So we've made that recommendation or offer to the chair, and we extend that to the board as well.
Thank you. Well, obviously, I would be interested in any ongoing process to make adjustments to the code. Like I said, we've tried doing this in the past many times. We've actually done one code change in 15 years from the board, but we have made many recommendations, and we have followed process going back at least 3 planning directors, like I said, with one success. And I'd also say we've had code changes that have been negative to preservation as well. So we've gone backwards. And when I look at the history of Stockton, I see it starting off fairly well in the 1960s and probably doing fairly well through about the late 1990s, but not since then. So I'm open to this. I'm open to communication and change. I have a comment here.
That would be me.
It would be Melanie. I have to look at my little card.
Generally speaking, I would like to make a motion that this board work with the City of Stockton on, take Scott Carney's offer to work with the city staff on possible modifications to the code to be recommended to the Planning Commission.
I second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. And, well, fine, thank you. I guess we've resolved this for the time being. We can move on. So, thank you.
We are happy to have a member of the Office of Historic Preservation here tonight. Shannon Prees is here to have 2 presentations regarding the Mills Act and also certified local government. They have been very gracious in providing feedback and input for the city, so we're happy to have her here.
Stephanie, if you don't mind, I think I'm going to suggest that we hold off on the certified local government presentation. Just in light of current discussions, I do think that it would be in the best interest of this board to work, briefly with staff. We are certainly here as a resource, and I would be more than happy to come back and speak even in more detail than I intended to tonight about that program. But because so many of the things that I was going to be covering are issues that you're sort of in the midst of grappling with, I would recommend that you work internally briefly before I kind of present my high level that could just complicate the conversation. That being said, I would like to thank city staff and this board for welcoming. I am Shannon Lochner-Prees from the California Office of Historic Preservation. I'm a staff member in the local government unit, have been for nearly 15 years now. I serve as one of the coordinators for the Certified Local Government Program. I am the Mills Act coordinator for the state, and I also do all of the HUD Section 106 review, which is part of the federal environmental review process. So I see quite a bit of work come through from the city of Stockton, and it's a pleasure to be here. I do think that the Mills Act is a program that would be highly beneficial for the program, or for the local government, and so I will give you, just kind of briefly, this is a very, very short presentation. I think I intended it to be about 15 minutes. And then I'll happily open it up to questions afterwards. And we can have a more open discussion. It doesn't have to be tailored just to the Mills Act. afterwards, but again, I do think it's probably in the best interest to hold off on the presentation at this time. So the Mills Act, it's an incentive for preserving your community's past. What is the Mills Act? Do you mind me asking how many of you are familiar with the program, what it is? Okay, so you know that it's a local property tax incentive that's designed to encourage the rehabilitation, restoration, or maintenance of what are known as qualified historical properties. In exchange for that maintenance or rehabilitation, a property owner will see a fairly significant property tax savings. Where's the Mills Act? This is something that, having done this for a long period of time, it always surprises me. Not only do property owners not know where they can find the Mills Act statute, but oftentimes local government staff that are administering the program don't know to look at the California Government Code, Article 12, Sections 5280 to 5290 to find the statute. It's enabling legislation that allows a local government to adopt a program, but it does not mandate that a local government adopt a Mills Act program. All of the authority, while it is a state law, is at the local level. Some basics. Local governments have all of the authority. Again, as I said, the Office of Historic Preservation, where I work, also known as the SHPO, serves just as kind of an advisory body, technical assistance for both local government staff, boards, and for property owners. And the Board of Equalization serves that same role for county assessors, who are responsible for implementing the financial side of things. What's the framework? Again, the local government controls the program. That means that you have the opportunity to tailor a program to your city's needs, to your goals. The framework spells out what a program must fit within, but you as a city could decide that you want to target certain neighborhoods, certain property types for your program. You can set application deadlines. You could set fees that helped enable cost recovery for staff time. Those are all things that are permissible within the local government. As you adopt your program, it's not mandated from the state level how any of that looks or works. The local government performs inspections. That's something that could be maybe delegated to members of this board, should that be how the local government decides to move forward. Again, totally up to you guys. The big deal is that a property that you're entering into a Mills Act contract with meets the definition of a qualified historical property. I'm sorry, you guys, I took this from a 2-hour presentation that I tried to distill down to 15 minutes, so I apologize that it's probably not coming off as fluidly as it normally would. But some big pieces of the Mills Act framework that are important: properties must be privately owned and subject to property tax, obviously. This is a big one. Contracts run with the title. And so as a sale happens, if a property is under a Mills Act contract, the new owner will see the benefits of that. That's something that actually surprises people. And believe it or not, it's a real selling point. I talk to real estate agents as often as I speak to property owners. They want to learn more about the program and really use that kind of as advertising, if you will, for selling their older properties or properties they're working with. Contracts are for a minimum of 10 years. They renew annually. It runs in perpetuity. Should neither the property owner nor the local government opt out of the contract. This is sort of a confusing concept to a lot of people, and it's even really difficult to articulate and explain. But essentially on that first anniversary, so the initial contract is for 10 years. On that first anniversary, an additional year is added on. So say on the second anniversary, a property owner decides they want to opt out of the contract. In their mind, they may think they only have 8 years left, when in fact, that contract, that first 10 years, is still there and will run off. Again, as I said earlier, the assessor will evaluate or assess the property annually. Framework specifics. Oh, this is the biggie. So what is a qualified historical property? Well, this is something that you as a local government would have the opportunity to determine what you were going to use for your program. However, the state statute says that a qualified historical property is any property that's listed in the National Register, the California Register, the California Historical Landmarks, Points of Interest, or something that's locally designated, or any contributor to a district that meets one of those definitions. So how does this all work? Annually, the assessor is required to assess a property at their factor base year. I used to call that the Prop 15 value, or Prop 13 value, sorry, when I first started doing this, and I was sort of admonished by an assessor that that's not the appropriate term to use, but the base factor year is essentially the Prop 13 rate. So then they're also assessed at the fair market rate for that year, and then using the Mills Act calculation. And annually, a property will be assessed at the lowest of those three rates. This is something that is a little bit comforting, I think, for property owners at times, because there's a concern that the Mills Act value might not be the best for them annually, particularly if they've owned the property for a long period of time and the formula isn't as beneficial. But given the fact that they're always assessed at the lowest of these three rates is definitely something that is helpful, bringing property owners to the table that, that are then willing to commit to this contract. Some local government issues, why a local government would choose to adopt a program. First, it helps retain and maintain historic properties. This is really just a stewardship incentive. It's really getting a property owner to commit to maintaining their historic property. It can definitely foster preservation in historic neighborhoods. We've seen lots of times in communities that have adopted a program where one property owner designates their property, gets into a Mills Act contract, starts doing some work, starts talking about how great it is to have these reduced property taxes, and word spreads, and you have other property owners coming to the table to do the same. It can definitely incentivize the commercial downtown if you choose to designate, that to target, say, maybe commercial properties in a certain area. The dollars and cents bring people to the table that definitely might not necessarily be interested in designating their property or committing to the rehabilitation, but because they're seeing this significant property tax savings it will get them there. It can help preserve the historic fabric, which is definitely a big thing for heritage tourism. We've seen in places like the city of Auburn, where the use of this program, I wouldn't say that Auburn has what I would call a necessarily, and I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but a preservation ethic. I mean, it's a strong land use or land rights, property rights city. However, this program and heritage tourism and the dollars that brings in is very significant to a lot of people, and they have used this program and with great success. A big thing is that the program is flexible. It's up to you as a city within the loose framework that's set up at that state statute 5280 to 5290 to determine how you want to administer this program. The program is voluntary. The state doesn't mandate that you have a program, and it also doesn't, your program will not require any property owner to commit to the terms of the contract. So both parties are happy in that you've come to the table mutually. And I should actually have taken this out because I said it's the only statewide incentive available to single-family property owners, and in fact, we actually just passed a state tax credit program, which when it is up and running in 2021 will be available to single-family homes, so that's not correct any longer. Implementing a program, how you'd go about doing this, well, you have some options. Either you could go through the process of adopting a standalone Mills Act program ordinance. You could include a Mills Act program along with other incentives in what you already had, the ordinance that you already have, which might be an issue or an option if you guys are really going to be working through, making some modifications to your ordinance as a whole. Or you could do something as simple as adopting a resolution or recommending that the council adopt a resolution that would enable a Mills Act program. It's totally up to you how you determine how you want to do that. Inspections are something that came about in 2012. The state statute was changed before any contract is entered into, and then every 5 years annually thereafter, the local government is required to go out and inspect properties that are under Mills Act contracts. So how you go about doing that is totally up to you as a community, whether it's staff members going out and doing the inspections at those 5-year marks, or as I mentioned, some places designate the board members individually to go out and do that. Other places simply do things like self-reporting, where a property owner is, sending in photos of the work that they've done to maintain. It's totally up to the local government how you want to handle it, what you have the staff time for, what you have the ability for. Statewide perspective, there are approximately 90 programs in the state right now. I use the County of Orange as an example of a community that has a very robust Mills Act program, yet they have no other historic preservation. They did not even have the political will to develop any kind of a designation program within the county. However, property owners were familiar with the program because they'd heard about it in other cities within the county, and they made enough noise that the county was willing to come to our office and say, if a property owner is willing to come go through the National Register or California Register designation program, we will then enter into a Mills Act contract with them. So simply by resolution, they adopted a Mills Act program. A property owner at their own will must come to the office, California Office of Historic Preservation, to designate, and then they can go back to the county. Individual contracts go all the way to the Board of Supervisors for approval, but it happens, and it happens pretty frequently. So again, that's kind of the as far back hands-off program as you have, where then there's places like the city of San Francisco where it's, they have application deadlines that are twice a year. Everything comes in then. Things get rated because only a certain number of applications can move forward. The Preservation Commission is the one that first designates and then second offers the Mills Act contract. So the programs are wide and different. I don't believe that there are two similar programs in the city, and that's where if you did choose to move forward with a program like this, or if you did recommend that it be considered, we could be technical assistance for you guys to help kind of flesh out what the priorities for the local government, for the city of Stockton are, and how best to develop a program that really truly meets your preservation needs. Again, no two programs. So again, I apologize that this is really typically a very long and in-depth presentation. That did not go as smoothly as I normally would like, but there you have it. There's the gist of a Mills Act contract or program at the 10,000 foot level, and if there was enough information there for you to even ask questions, feel free to shoot them my direction. I'd be more than happy to answer both those, and then also questions about, preservation programs around the state in general.
The first question is, you're going to come back next month and do the other presentation?
I don't know that it would be next month necessarily. I just, speaking from our office and our perspective, it's very important for us not to get involved in depth in local issues in a public forum like this. We're happy to have, conference calls, that sort of thing. I just think given the discussions that were happening this evening, it wouldn't be appropriate for us to, again, kind of be adding another layer of information and things to think through while you're digesting what you are as a group right now. I don't know that December would be the appropriate time for that, but maybe once, I'm happy to stay in contact with staff, and once maybe some more conversations have happened, internally with the board and staff, once we know that it's a good time to come back.
Well, the reason I asked
after the first of the year.
The reason I asked the question is because I asked staff to invite SHPO to provide the presentations to the board so that we could recommend to the Planning Commission, having heard the presentation, and City Council adapting the program, and so, or considering it. That was the intent of the presentation. And so the future presentation would be on another benefit that Stockton could adapt. And I would like the board to recommend that we recommend, as it were, that these things be adopted in the same sense of code changes and so forth. So if you came back next month, we could make a recommendation on the second presentation, but we could also make a recommendation that they adopt this as well tonight, the Mills Act itself, which would be a benefit to the state. So,
if you found it useful, I mean, I could send through staff, I'd be happy to send some information about the program that you could review, individually, and learn a little bit more about the Certified Local Government Program. I can tell you that a big piece of whether or not, so just in general, the Certified Local Government Program is a program from the National Park Service. It was adopted when changes were made to the National Historic Preservation Act in 1980, and it was really clear that true preservation was happening at the local level. And so this program was adopted as a partnership between the Park Service, the 52 SHPOs, because there are some territories that have SHPOs as well, and local governments. And it's a process through which the State Historic Preservation Office will recommend to the Park Service the certification of a local preservation program. The ordinance is really the crux of that. And so while your ordinance is in flux or there's some conversation about it, there's really not a lot of hope that our office would be in a position to forward the program if we don't know what the ordinance might look like, what your program might look like in a matter of months. So until some of those things are resolved, I would recommend that this is probably not the best time to resolve, to recommend certification while you're addressing your ordinance issues. Once some of those things have been sorted out and you know for sure that your program is moving forward with a certain look and a certain process, then of course we would be more than happy. And again, we are happy to be involved in conversations as this all happens. I mean, that's what we're here for, is to provide that technical assistance while you're talking through these issues. But
well, my hope was that we could get the Planning Commission and City Council to invite you to present the benefits of the program to them. That's what my objective actually is, because we're just recommenders. We don't have decision-making authority. But I think that the Planning Commission and the City Council would benefit greatly knowing more about these programs, as well as Historic Building Code and other things that the City of Stockton has historically considered but never implemented. And I'm not sure of their awareness, and so I'm hoping to get, that was the intent. And since the board can make a recommendation, that's what I'm hoping to do. I see, oh, Stephanie's beeping, okay.
If I may, if the board is willing, we can create a sort of work plan where we come back to talk about the demolition ordinance. The next meeting, we could talk about Mills Act, where we take a piece at a time of portions of the ordinance, come back with some recommendations, some changes that you'd like, and then at that point, maybe have a better idea of what the final product would look like, similar to what Shannon's mentioning. And then at that point, we can coordinate with her for her to come back and do a follow-up presentation and move forward with that code update. Kind of have a work plan for the next few meetings.
Phillip.
I like the idea of having a work plan that's segmented, solely because I'd like to invite members of the community who would like to sit in on this and potentially listen about what's happening with respect to these potential historic preservation incentives. I think that would be beneficial for the city at large.
That is exactly right.
Yeah.
if I may, that public involvement is a large piece of the Certified Local Government Program and something that would be critical for us to see through that certification process as well, so.
Well, it is in Stockton, it's been a chicken and an egg issue, and try to get some momentum in the right direction with some changes that could benefit. And the SHPO was full of wonderful information and programs and things, and the communication.
And normally we do a better job presenting them.
That's all right, that's all right. No, that was actually really good, and for our purposes, it's
It's a
excellent, so.
difficult concept to distill down in 15 minutes.
I understand, but like I said, I would like to get a grander dialogue in city government and the boards and commissions involved. That's the idea. And, in Stockton, selling the city on the idea of the benefits of preservation is difficult. It's been really hard. And the idea that there are incentives and there is money and there are grants and all these various I'm summarizing a bunch of programs. I'm not going individually. These are all things that Stockton could be adopting that are not at cost to the city that would benefit and create. And there is support in Stockton for it, but it's very difficult to marshal. So that was the intention. So
I do believe that the Mills Act, again, as I've seen around the state, is a program that is an easier sell oftentimes than a larger preservation program because it comes at fairly little cost to the local government. It is voluntary again. It's something that, you know, the heritage tourism piece of it and things like that really will bring people to the table, and they're more open-minded to the program than they maybe would be with a traditional preservation program. I've seen it work in places that has, if I may admit, has surprised me. So I would really strongly encourage you to look deeper at that program, even as a first start while you're working through some of these other issues. So.
Yeah, in other cities, it's been very sellable to property owners because they
Absolutely.
discover that there's a cash benefit in the reduction of taxes. Member Corradi.
Is there anything we need to do to move forward with a work plan?
You can make a motion directing staff to prepare a work plan with different sections of the ordinance. If you'd like to go in order based off the discussions tonight, we can talk about the demolition ordinance. We could talk about Mills Act after that. We could talk about any other sections you'd like. I could start off with 2, and then next meeting you tell me a few more that you'd like to focus on, or I can create a work plan after that with portions.
We might suggest make a motion starting with demolition.
Yeah, that was really wordy, so I can't remember everything that you said, but I'd like to make
a motion for
to-
staff to prepare a work plan to review ordinance.
The motion could be what she
for
said.
staff to prepare a work plan on demolition ordinance and possible Mills Act.
Sure. Yeah.
Do we have
I'll second.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.
And thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Certainly, and again, we're happy to come back with additional information about any of the programs that you are interested in.
Well, thank you very much. Bob, the man next to me who I can't see.
I just wanted, a question for staff. I'm a little bit confused about one thing with the Mills Act and whether I thought the city was involved with the Mills Act at one time and they're not now, or have they ever been, or do you have any knowledge of that?
My understanding is that we are not participating. I do not know if we were previously, but as far as I know, we don't currently participate in the Mills Act. We would have to get a new resolution or an ordinance from the council. Are you familiar with? I don't think we are. We haven't been.
No, not since I've been in this role, but that doesn't mean that I think staff would know best.
Right, and what I'm thinking of was projects that are over 10 years old too, so property would no longer even be covered by the Mills Act, like the Hotel Stockton and some of these other projects.
They automatically renew. So it's always a 10-year contract. It just keeps growing by a year. So either the city or the property owner would have had to cancel that, and that would have had to been recorded. So that would be in our files if there's any active Mills Act agreements, and we can do a quick record search. But as far as I know, we have not participated.
It would be recorded with the title of the property, and Stephanie's correct. There would have to have been a notice of non-renewal that likely would be filed with the property. So even if the contract hadn't been entered into, in current memory, I think probably the process to get out, folks would be knowledgeable of.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Any more questions for our guest? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Moving on, do we have staff reports?
No, that was the last item, Chair.
Okay, no, I thought you had a report. Okay.
No, I have no informational items tonight. I think we covered a lot.
Okay, so I think we made a useful motion. We have a direction for the future. I think we're done.
The last section is board comments, but.
Yeah,
if you don't have any-
I've commented. I've made many comments tonight. Does anybody else have a comment? Oh, okay. It's Mr. Holzer again?
When I was reviewing some of the earlier minutes from previous meetings, I thought that in one of the meetings we talked about having a discussion about some other structures of merit. I don't remember exactly which properties they are now, but it was mentioned that it would be covered in an upcoming meeting. And I think this was either in the like in the March meeting or quite some time ago. I wonder if we could maybe have a discussion of one of those properties in an upcoming meeting. And also, I think there's kind of an unresolved issue as far as these recommendations that we've made in the past that aren't on the list on the city website and so on.
Thank you for bringing that up. You just reminded me that list has been updated.
So there were 4 additions?
I believe so. I'll double check, but I went through all the notes from our previous meetings and I had it uploaded to the website.
Oh, that's good. I hadn't looked this week. Hang on a second. I'm getting your button. Philip.
Sorry. They are there.
Excellent. No, I hadn't checked. They weren't there recently, but I checked.
Yeah.
I guess that's back to Bob's point, is that I hope we still have a backlog of applications that we could have for the next meeting, something.
We're
hoping.
working through those. As per a previous meeting, the Madison Street was brought forth today as agendized by the board. We will continue working through those applications.
Okay, thank you. And Philip again, right? Yes.
Yeah. One thing, I have a board comment, actually, if we're done on this topic. At the museum that I work at, we have Charles Weber's house and cottage, and then his daughter's house as well. They got moved there about 30 years ago when in a previous planning paradigm, the city was planning to demolish them. And we're currently in the process of getting them listed as state landmarks. And potentially the Charles Weber cottage is a National Historic Landmark. I don't know if there's a process. I know that because they've been moved and they're no longer in the city of Stockton, they're not being listed as properties in the city of Stockton, because that's how it works through, and we have a state parks expert here to clarify if that's the case. But they were in the city of Stockton originally. And I don't know if there's any ceremonial designation for moved, or for structures that have been moved for the purposes of preserving them. But if there is, I think it'd be worthwhile in doing that.
If it's not within the city, we don't have any land use
Yeah.
authority
Yeah.
for anything of
It's
that
too bad.
nature.
Yeah, okay.
If we got the county to do a designation program, but also the movement's a problem often too, so.
Yeah, well, we moved them because they were going to get
No, I
demolished.
understand.
Yeah,
I'm saying, but that's all the in situ thing about historic properties. Anthony.
This is a new topic, so.
I'm done.
2 items. One, I believe it was in our last meeting, which I think was 3 months ago, about, and I forget what the result was, but about discussing a habitually absent board member.
Yes, so we are actually planning to bring an item next month where we're going to talk about some of those like board policies.
Okay. And then secondly, I know we've been hemming and hawing over the awards for a while, so I wasn't sure if we wanted, now that we're at the end of the year, if we just want to look forward to this coming spring, summer, how we want to do that, but I just wanted to bring it up again.
Melanie.
Yeah, it would be nice to get those awards of excellence, that back on the agenda. I can tell you our clients, honestly, it really does, our clients really appreciate receiving those sorts of awards. I can tell you just from personal experience. And yeah, I just think it was one of my favorite things that we did on this board. And I know it's been a number of years since we've done them, so thank you for bringing that up. I've got a pile of nominations at my desk. So it would be great, and maybe next year if we could somehow agendize that and start the process.
How would you, for clarification, I'm not sure how to agendize the award. My understanding was a subcommittee essentially ran that process.
Oh, is it? Okay, I think we have to open up nominations. I think that was something that had to be officially done, was opening up nominations. Okay. So that has to be published, and it's my understanding anyway. I don't know how.
Bob has handled it several times in the past.
Do we need to move to do something like that, take action to?
We have an open period of like around a month.
Is it a month? Okay.
And people are free to submit applications for the certificate, not for the certificate, for the Award of Excellence. And then when those are submitted, the board, well, it's it's the award committee, which has been me in the past. I make a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation of each one of the applicants, and then the board votes on who we think is worthy of getting the awards, and then we take it to the planning commission, and then they vote on it as well.
So staff is awaiting your direction. We can agendize that if you have a time frame for nomination period. Go ahead and forward that to us, and we'll help get it on the agenda for you. I was not sure of staff's role in that process.
I didn't, excuse me, sorry. What time, for those of us who are new to the board, what time of the year historically have these awards been given out?
Bob?
I think they've been pretty much near the end, like around now.
Okay.
Bob, don't we require, we need a press release, right?
Yeah, there usually is a press release. The city used to have a list of architectural firms in the city, or people like that they could just recommend to, but I don't think you have that list anymore.
Could we have?
We can agendize this for next month, and maybe the awards committee can provide maybe just a brief summary like you've just stated of kind of what you'd like to see, and we can work it out together.
I was just thinking, couldn't Bob, having done this before, do you have the press release? Did you compose it, or would the city compose it? Can you provide a press release? We can make a motion to have the staff initiate a press release, and then we can come back to it.
I think it was done by staff many years ago, and that, when I came on, it already existed.
We'll bring it back next month with what we can find, and then the board can give us direction, if the board so wills it.
I was just thinking we could initiate it now. Because press release, we used to do them, as I recall. I never wrote them, but it was the city's, it was a public notice soliciting nominations.
Chair, if I may, sorry, just for the purposes of that item not being agendized.
No, okay.
I think that's why Stephanie's suggestion is to bring it before you, so it's agendized and you can communicate with the public as to your goals.
We can request to be agendized for the next meeting.
Correct, I believe it's noted.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Any other board comments? If not, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
I will motion that we adjourn.
Second.
Second, thank you. I'm saying everyone's in favor, I'm assuming. Thank you.
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah.
5 minutes
I
ago?
know, I was like,
No,
I totally appreciate it.
Last one was 7 to 8, and then
you're welcome. I know it was a little.
Okay, so are you missing a dancing lesson right now?
The movement.
I already know.
Okay.
So I just do that with the dancing.